Good afternoon. We are back with another Restart Your Business, Recharge Your Life session. Today we have Becky Gillespie.
Yes.
I said it right. She's the CEO, founder, and host from the School of Travels, which is a podcast. And Becky's today here to talk about podcasts. So welcome, Becky. Thank you very much to accept our invitation to talk here with us.
Thank you, Alexandra and Avila Spaces for having me.
So we can start talking, of course, of what is a podcast. Maybe we have people that it's not familiar yet with the idea. So you can tell us what is a podcast?
Sure. So it used to be known as audio blogging, essentially, but the name podcast started being used in 2004, and it's actually a combination of iPod and broadcast.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so essentially what it is like someone who's independently producing their own radio show.
Okay.
It's on-demand radio. You go and find an episode or a topic you want to listen to, and immediately you can click on that topic, that show, that episode, and listen for as long as that show happens to be.
Okay, nice. So I think nowadays a lot of people have podcasts. I know people that listen to podcasts. Do you think having a podcast channel is beneficial, or why you consider it would be a nice idea to have a podcast in your business?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea, like there are actually over 1.7 million podcasts out there now. And as of January of this year, there were 43 million episodes that have been produced. So this is a huge industry, and it's been growing now for over 15 years. So if you have a podcast, you are going to be out there with a lot of other people. But I think making a podcast is really one of the best ways to connect with your customers and this audience that you're hoping to grow, because it's a more intimate way to connect than, someone just going to your website and clicking on it. You can spend, some podcasts are 3 hours long. You can spend like 3 hours with essentially someone in your ear, just having a conversation with you or closely listening to what they're talking about, and people find that they feel so much closer. They almost know the host like a family member after spending, years sometimes listening to the show.
And do you think like having a podcast, all the companies can work to make a podcast, or do you think like, maybe some companies are not really made to have a podcast, other type of companies could really work this thing? What is your opinion?
So to be honest, I think if it's like a really large factory producing like, let's say, steel or something, like maybe this steel factory doesn't need to make a podcast.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually there's so many ways you can design a podcast that really it depends what your goals are, but you could really, any company could do it. Like maybe you have some employees from the steel factory and you're going to make a, everyday example of what the life is like for them working in the factory. And you could make it dramatic and it could become really fun,
Yeah.
So it's all what you want to do.
Like basically you can do a podcast of anything.
Yes.
Okay, of anything you want. And how it can be, I mean, of course, maybe we have people that have businesses, and then maybe they had this idea of doing a podcast. How it can be financially beneficial, because maybe some companies can do it just for for fun, for like having a connection with the community. So this is their main goal, to have the community closer. But maybe businesses that are thinking to have this in a way of income, why, like, it's beneficial?
Right, so it's really a great way to start to grow your audience or grow your customer base, and your podcast is pushed out to all these different services, which I think we're going to talk about later. And your show is out there and anybody can find you. But when you make the podcast, it's obviously an audio format, so you always can like say things to your audience, like go to my website and look at this after the show, or go to this company that I have an affiliate link with.
Exactly.
So and you can also have them sign up with their email address to the website, and then you're growing this audience and your email list is growing,
and you can become potential clients of the company. I understand. Okay, but it's fast to be financially. beneficial?
A lot. It depends. It depends where you're coming from. So if you're, you had a very small audience to begin with, it can take a while to grow to the point where then you can also have sponsors for your podcast. And usually it's the host themselves. Like, for example, I would be reading about this ad for my sponsor in my voice, so that my listeners are familiar with me. They would prefer me to do the ad.
Exactly.
And then you're paid by the sponsors depending on what the deal is you make with them for every episode.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's one way. There's also merch, like you can make t-shirts, coffee mugs, whatever you want.
Like if you were a singer.
Yeah, so there's so many ways to make money. Once that, I think it's important first to grow the audience.
Okay.
And then everything is possible, really.
Nice. Okay, I understand. And well, as we said before, maybe people that are interested in podcasts, I think it's a world super new. Basically, there's something that I always wanted to learn about, but I didn't know how to start. Like, okay, what to find, where to find the podcast, what about. What are the basic tools for people that know or may be interested in starting a podcast?
So you need a microphone, and there's a lot of different ones out there. There's a pretty popular one by Audio Technica. I think it's like the AXR 2100.
Okay.
If you look up Audio Technica starter mic, you'll find it. Okay. It's about $100, and a lot of people use that. Or like the Blue Yeti microphone is also really popular. Or RODE, the Rode mic, has a series. There's even a Rode podcaster mic now.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. So you need a microphone,
basically.
and you need a quiet space. And honestly, like, you also need to you need to write out your script for an introduction that's going to be the same introduction for every podcast episode you make.
Exactly.
And usually like some kind of what I call an outro, like the ending, your last like sales
having
pitch,
like a famous last scene, right? Like maybe on TV shows, or maybe there's always specific actors that have a paragraph that they always say at the end of the movie, something like this. Okay.
Yeah. So for me this year, I always say stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned.
Oh, okay.
In 2020, always at the end. So something at the beginning, something at the end, and of course you need some way to start your podcast, which usually is some kind of music. So if you're looking for music, there's two main websites I like to go to, Upwork and Fiverr. And these are, websites where you find somebody else who's they're already good at doing that, and they can make the music for you.
Okay, so, basically you need to know about these things, and also you imagine you can find tutorials in YouTube that you can see this kind of information, because maybe people doesn't know where to start.
Yeah, and that's actually another tip, is just go to YouTube and say how to start a podcast. And there's probably a guy who did a 10-minute video telling you like step by step with the links there.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also easy financially to start a podcast, or do you need a lot of investment? I mean, maybe the most expensive thing is the microphone.
Yeah, it's really cheap, and honestly, you don't even need that to start. I mean, I think a lot of people almost expect you to not have great audio quality when you start.
Yeah.
It's a bonus if you do, but even your smartphone, all of them now have built-in recorders, and if you're in a quiet enough space, you could even start with that. Or your computer. Your computer has a built-in mic.
And I have a little question, like sometimes when you start, now for example, we have like TikTok, that it's an app that it's growing, and basically there's like certain people that got famous because they start the TikTok era super fast, and there's another one that now there's a lot of competition, right? Like to distinguish yourself from the others. In podcasts, it happens the same. Like it's on podcasts, it's on that timeline that it's difficult to make a difference, to talk about something new, or to like distinguish yourself from other channels.
Like I've said, it's a crowded space now, but if you come up with a new concept, or if you connect, like if you do interviews, which I do on my podcast, try to reach out to people. You never know who's going to say yes, when you reach out. So if they've got a big following already, it's one way to try to get your audience growing faster.
And it's difficult to get creative on podcasts, because for now, imagine you need a computer, microphone, these are the basic tools, but then it's something like it's not talking to the public, like maybe doing a YouTube video. Like you can just like do crazy things and like, okay, look at this guy, look at this girl, what he's doing. Like how difficult it's to be creative in podcasts, because basically it's yourself and your voice.
Yeah, so it's just the only limit is your own creativity, and it's actually easy in some ways. It's just, I think, hard to catch, to stand out in a crowd of everybody. But yeah, there's all these different ways to be creative. As I said, you can have one other person on your podcast, you can have multiple people.
Yeah.
A lot of people get little sound bites from a lot of different people and tell
Mm-hmm.
a story throughout. Or they have people call in and leave voicemails or voice notes, and then they put them all together.
Okay.
So it's really just what you want to do. Some people only have podcasts that are 10 minutes long, and they put them out every day. It could be a 3-minute podcast.
Yeah, so this is more reachable. Maybe people like want to listen podcasts. They don't want to spend a lot of time. I mean, you can be creative, right? Like I just asked you because I don't know anything about podcasts.
Yeah.
So when you start like now having a conversation, for me, it's super difficult to. Okay, what else you can do, but for sure, when you are in the world of podcasts, you always know how to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, there's also one of the most famous podcasts that was ever made that has now 3 seasons.
Okay.
It's called Serial, Serial.
I heard about it.
Yeah, it was the most, it still might be
Yeah.
the most listened to podcast ever. And Serial means a sequence. So it was the first big podcast to do a story over many episodes, where the story continues into episode 2, episode 3. Then it became almost more like a TV show that you're listening to, and it was really it just captured the imagination of everyone.
You listen to that podcast?
Oh yeah, the first season especially is incredibly addictive. It's about a high school murder. It's true crime, essentially. But I mean, it really happened.
I will like it.
You're not sure who the, I don't want to give away too much, but just listen to season 1 of Serial. I recommend that to anybody that's starting out with podcasts.
Okay, I will definitely do it. And what are like the top platforms of streaming? Because again, people that may not know about podcast may think like, okay, like this is where I know like maybe Spotify has, because sometimes when you're listening to Spotify, you have like sometimes publicity saying like, well, listen to our podcast. But apart from Spotify, or if you can talk about a little bit more about Spotify, which are the other tools?
Sure. So Spotify is probably is definitely one of the biggest now. Apple Podcasts is still out there. It's the first one that started pushing out all these shows. And, yeah, and also Google Podcasts, and Stitcher is another one.
Okay, these I don't know.
Yeah, Tune In or iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio. Yeah. This is a podcast?
This is a site where you can find podcasts.
Okay.
And you can just listen to them straight from the site.
I didn't know iHeartRadio had, because I follow it, but I didn't know it had podcast. I have to check now.
Yeah.
I have to check. And well, now talking about like your personal experience, of course, in podcast, like I would like to ask you different questions, but if you want to first start talking about your experience, and then I will ask the questions.
Sure. So, like, I started thinking about making a podcast because people kept telling me, like, you have a real voice, a real, like, radio voice.
You do have a really radio voice.
Thank you. I was like, maybe after the 4th or 5th time I heard this, maybe there's something I should do about it. And I love traveling. I've been to 70 countries now, and
really?
I naturally connect with people as I'm traveling, and I've been inspired by some other podcasts. I mean, I was not the first travel podcast out there, but like we were talking about, even if there's so many other shows doing something similar, you are a unique person, and you can make your own unique show, and there's nothing that should stop you. So I just started interviewing people, and now I have 52 episodes out there, and I've continued to just ask people what they've learned from travel, or what has travel taught them. And so that's why I called it the School of Travels. And also I find it's just a great way, it's a really great way to connect with people and highlight people that may not have been able to share their story before. So I have a lot of people on my show that have never been on another podcast before, and it's really cool. They have great stories, and I love it.
You never know, like everybody has their own adventure, so you never know.
Yes.
And how you, well, apart from like the idea of wanting to talk about travels, you had any difficulty to start a podcast? Like you were a little bit lost maybe in the beginning?
Yeah, so it's hard. Like there's so many things on your to-do list at the beginning.
Okay.
I was like, what song do I use? Like there's so many decisions to make.
Yeah.
And it's funny, my song I had been inspired by, I heard it first on a YouTube video.
Okay.
And the guy who made the song is so small, he's so unknown as a musician. Like he has a small following. I just reached out to him on Twitter, because it's important to make sure that you have the right to use the song.
Exactly.
And so he just said yes, and I have like the screenshot of him saying, yes, you can use it. Send me
That's nice.
Send me a link when it's done.
That's
and
nice.
But yeah, it's the song. It's you're nervous because you have to write the script.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be good enough? Will anyone listen? But you just have to get past all of this, and I say just put it out there. But also, if you're going to do it, have at least, I would say, 5 to 10 episodes ready
Prepared.
to go
Okay.
before you even start, because then you can start releasing but not feel so much pressure and
Exactly.
overwhelm
Exactly.
when you first start.
And in your experience, which is your favorite tool to use? I'm going to ask like 2 questions in one.
Yeah.
Which is your favorite tool
Mm-hmm.
to use on podcast, and then which is the style that you use on your podcast?
So I actually used to edit my own podcast. I just started having someone else do it. And I
Really?
would always use Audacity, which is a free editing tool, and it's
Okay.
really easy to use. And so I like that. It may not be the best if you start to pay for editing software. GarageBand from iTunes is
Okay.
another one you can use. But I liked that tool, and I liked my mic that was actually a Zoom IQ6 mic that I just plugged right into my
Okay.
smartphone, and that way it felt really easy to interview people
Exactly.
because it was so small. And I interview people. I love interacting, especially in person. Been a little harder this past year,
Yeah.
but almost all of my episodes I'm right in the room with the person
Okay.
when we're interviewing, and so I love hearing people's stories and putting it out
And
there.
which are the different styles of podcasts, and also which one do you think it calls more attention to people?
So I would say now, with people's short attention spans, probably a half hour like we're doing right now is a good amount of time. People have shorter attention spans.
Yeah.
But I still stick to about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour for a lot of my podcasts. And I like the interview style, but you have a lot of news podcasts, which businesses could easily do, where they just give the news. Maybe it's a 10-minute, 15-minute podcast.
Well,
where
yeah, I have a friend that listens to the news, and like they are commenting the news on a podcast, which is I never did it, but I think like me to be like super focused on a channel of podcast, it will have to be like, maybe I will check out the one that you said, but also I think I will like as well more the interview, because you are like having more, you are listening about something that you're interested on.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're sharing experiences with another person. So I think me as a listener of podcast, I would choose the interview as well, because it looks like more soft to pay attention to. It's way easier to not lose the connection with the thing talking at that time.
Yeah, I will say that I have done a few solo episodes, and it's hard. It feels like
Right?
you
It might
need
be
to
hard.
use music to kind of break up the different sections so that
Exactly.
people aren't just listening to you for an hour. But sometimes it's only something that I experienced, or I'm telling a story about, a country I went to, and it was my trip, so I just did it on my
Yeah.
own. But I prefer at least
You
one
prefer
or
the
two
interview.
other people.
And how
Yeah.
do you reach to people? Like people who is doing these interviews with you are friends, are like random people that you met?
In my case so far, and so I just told you I have 52 episodes, and actually before I started my podcast, I made a list of 50 people I think I could already interview.
Okay.
And then I was like, hey, if I can do 50, it's probably something I could do for a while.
Yeah.
So I did that, and they were mostly friends I'd met while traveling, but I've found that now it's like friends of friends, or now I have podcast friends, and they're like, we had this person on our show, maybe they would fit for your show, reach out to them.
Okay.
And so it's like
That's
a
nice.
second degree connection. Yeah.
And where did you stream your podcast?
So my podcast is available on all the places that I've mentioned, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and I use a podcast hosting site called Libsyn.
Okay. Okay.
That was one of the early famous
Yeah.
podcast hosting sites. And what a podcast hosting site is, by the way, didn't know this before I started, is where you can upload your audio file the description of what the episode's about, and some tag words, keywords.
Okay.
And then this site, I pay $15 a month for what I'm doing.
15 or 50?
15, 15. For this, and it pushes out your file to all these different places.
And also the position on CEO as well for people.
Yes, and you can see how many listens. Depends how much you pay per month. You can get more information.
So basically, you have a tool that translates, like, catches all the sentences, all the words that you're saying, and put it like up subtitles, or just some random words.
So this isn't transcription. This is just releasing my episode to many different places for me, rather than me going to Spotify and putting a link and then going to Google and putting a link. These are companies that will push out the episode for you.
Okay.
If you want to get transcription, there's actually a website called Temi, TEMI.com. It's one place that does it, but they charge like 25 cents a word. 25 cents a minute, actually.
Okay.
So if for my hour, it would be about $15 for one episode, but it depends how much you do.
And you in your podcast, you have like a picture, what do you have like to use, like, or what do you think it would be the best? Because maybe people wants to put lighter pictures so people can catch more attention. Maybe I don't know what's the strategy here. So what do you use?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you could do. I started, like, because as I said, I do a lot of my interviews in person. I started taking a selfie with the person, and it's that style that I've kept, is just the selfie with the person. Sometimes I wasn't able to interview them, so I just say, can you send me your favorite photo of yourself so that people can see you? Or one couple I interviewed, nice. It was an RV trip. They're traveling in an RV across America, so they had like a picture of their RV, themselves, and their dog.
That's nice.
Yeah, so I could have put like a lot more travel photos there with them, but it just depends what you want to do to catch the interest of people.
And it was difficult to get, like, I don't know which is the background, like, what did you do before podcast?
I actually was an English teacher in Japan for several years, so I was used to, and I was teaching the last 4 years there one-on-one with people. So I mean, it was an hour. It was exactly what I do.
So it was difficult to, like, say, okay, I'm going to fully dedicate to podcast. It's a world that I don't know. I'm just going to jump into it. It was difficult.
It was difficult to get started, like just to finally get started, because I think this is something that a lot of people would like to do. And I've had a lot of friends approach me and say, how do I start one? I'd like to try one myself. And then I don't see them started, because there is a lot of work involved once you start. And I would tell that to people, like, have a plan for what you're going to do long term. I knew that eventually I would outsource my editing, because that's the part that was the most time consuming for me. And like I've said, you can go to Upwork or Fiverr and find somebody to do that for you.
Okay. Like, I don't want to be invasive with this question, but do you think people can live from podcasts?
People can. It depends. It really depends on the concept that you have, often how many big name people that you're interviewing. Also consistency. Just like with YouTube, you need to consistently put out content. Some people do it once a week. I do mine every 2 weeks because I'm doing it mostly by myself. And I will also be, full disclosure, this is not the only thing I do to make money.
Okay.
A lot of people do start it on the side, hoping it's going to grow and grow. And I still have a full-time job, and this is something I do on the side, which is another reason I just do 2 episodes a month. And
your job that you're doing now, it has to be something with podcasts, or maybe it might be related. It can give you tools, it can give you tips, or it doesn't.
It's actually not related, but the interesting thing is, because I've learned so much with editing and preparing podcasts, if I really focused on it, there's so much demand for people wanting to start podcasts that I could go into business with that. I've seen a lot of my podcast friends go into their own podcast business, where they start editing for people, or they've learned so much about it that they market podcasts for other people.
And do you have a lot of competence in this? I mean, of course, tourism is something that people usually love to travel. Do you have a lot of competence here, like on podcasts that are talking about travels, or maybe they have a similar idea of yours, like interviewing people who is talking about travels? And do you have competence here?
Yeah, like a lot of competition, other people doing similar things. There are a lot of travel podcasts out there.
Okay.
But what you find too is once you become a podcaster, you find this podcast community of other hosts, and you don't really compete. You kind of collaborate. Like you go on their podcast, nice. You go to a conference where you meet all of them and you get to hang out. So you're really opening yourself up to a whole new network of people when you start podcasting. Just like any new hobby you might get involved in, you know.
And do you also were part of another podcast? Like another person interviewed you about your work?
Yeah, so the people I would mention first are the World Wanderers.
Okay.
The World Wanderers podcast. They've been doing it like 2 or 3 years longer than I have. But I've been on their podcast now about 3 times. We seem to meet up every year, and we
like
have
a
great
reunion,
time.
right?
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like mostly been in Mexico recently, but we've met in a few different countries now. And we were connected by another podcaster on a Facebook group. So there's a lot of Facebook groups out there too. If you're looking for information,
in Facebook you can find everything, right? Like there's groups for everything.
Oh yeah.
And like talking more about like your experience. Which is the people that you interview? Like you focus on travels, but you focus on experience that they had, unusual places, or just like I went to Paris and I did this, and this. Like which is the? We know it's from people who travels, but which is the? What is inside of that people who travels like?
So now it's been a big variety. I just recently interviewed someone who had crossed the Atlantic in a small catamaran with 7 other people.
They did it?
They did it, yeah. They just got there 2 weeks ago, actually. They left Lisbon, they flew to Cape Verde, and then they took a catamaran with 7 others across the Atlantic. Because. Yeah, I think just because also like all the restrictions with COVID, it's hard to fly. So they had never done this. They'd never sailed that far, and they're like, let's do it in this way and have an adventure, because as we said, there's still a chance to choose freedom and inside yourself, and then, you know, having adventures is so important to all of us, I think. And so that was one. I've done like online dating as you travel. I interviewed one guy, crazy guy, funny guy. But I mean, you have all these different experiences in so many places, and it's hard when you're moving around. It's hard to connect and see how those long-term things are going to go. So.
And you have a lot of people like listening to your podcast. Do you have any report that can tell you how many people it's listening, sharing?
Yeah, so there's different tiers of information. You can pay and get more and more information. You can find out which countries the people are coming from. You can find out how long they've been listening, when they drop off and stop listening. So there are a lot of statistics out there.
So basically, as we have only 1 minute left until our it passed super fast. So basically, you will recommend this to businesses. You will recommend them to jump for it. It's something that, of course, if you want to be dedicated, it takes time, it takes work for you, but basically it's something that you can pre-dedicate some hours of the week to just release the podcast. So, as we said, you will really recommend it for companies to get more approach to the community.
Yes, and also depending on their strategy, I think it's great too if you have, you know, a few employees, so you can get a couple of them working on it together, or if you have the budget, start making your outsourcing plans.
Okay. Thank you very much, Becky. It was super interesting. I didn't know anything about podcasts, so it was really, really fun and really cool to talk with you about it.
Thank you.
And next week we're going to receive Douglas Lemelo, and he's going to talk about DevOps. So thank you very much, and we wait for you next week.